Hello Synapse community, my name is Ryan Majitimer, and I'm a product manager on the Azure Synapse Analytics team. Welcome to today's episode of the Synapse MVP video series. Each month I'm joined by an MVP and they tell us about something that they're interested in. This month I'm joined by Kevin Chant, who's going to be telling us a little about CI/CD and Serverless SQL. This is a very popular topic, so I'm sure you've heard about it, thought about it, been wondering how you might do continuous integration and continuous deployment, which I believe is what those stand for, in Synapse. Going to hand it over to Kevin for him to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about CI/CD. Welcome.
Thanks for that, Ryan. And hello, everybody. My name is Kevin Chant, and I'm a lead BI and analytics architect living in the Netherlands. However, as some of you can probably tell from the accent, I'm actually originally from the southwest of the UK. Anyway, when Azure Synapse Analytics Serverless SQL pools were first introduced, the question on the minds of a lot of people in the data platform community was how they were going to be able to perform CI/CD for them. So, I had a look into it and figured out one way that you can do it by using the DBOps PowerShell module and the dbup.net framework. And I can actually show you how this all looks together now. So, this is the DBOps PowerShell module, which is available in the PowerShell gallery. And in addition to that, there's also a GitHub repository for this module as well. And if I scroll down, you can see there's quite a well-detailed README for it. And in addition to that, it quite clearly states that it uses the dbup.net library. So, if we go over to the dbup website, as you can see, it says to get started, you need to create a C# console project. And I actually created one of those earlier in Visual Studio Code, as you can see here. So the idea is you create this project and then over time you add more scripts for the objects you want to be created in your serverless SQL pool. Now, in order to be able to perform CI/CD with this particular project, what you first have to do is initialize the folder that this project is in on your local machine to be a Git repository. And you can do that in Visual Studio Code by using the source control feature. And then once you've made the folder a Git repository, you can look to synchronize it with a Git repository that's in Azure Repos, which is the service you use in Azure DevOps for your version control. And as you can see, I have a copy or a clone of the repository here. And once you have a copy of the repository in Azure Repos, you can then use it with Azure Pipelines, which is the service you use to do the deployments. So I'm just going to navigate to a pipeline I already created for this earlier. And just so you all know, and as you can clearly see here, this is actually a YAML pipeline. And I'm showing you how to do it using a YAML pipeline so you can see how to do this using infrastructure as code. Of course, you can still use the classic editor if you want to do this using a GUI-based way as well. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of what this particular YAML pipeline does. So first of all, it goes off to get variables from two different variable groups that I've created in the library. One of them contains non-sensitive information, such as agent pool I want to use, and the other one contains a link to secrets that are in Azure Key Vault, which is considered to be good practice. So from there, I state that every time the main branch in the repository is updated, this pipeline will run, and that's effectively what this trigger does. I then use an agent pool that I've created, which will connect up to a serverless SQL pool that I've already got created. Then in the actual stage, I first check to make sure the DBOps PowerShell module is installed. Once that's done, I run another PowerShell task, which first gets the value of a password, which I've got stored as a secret in Key Vault, and converts it to be a secure string so I can use it within the PowerShell commandlet. I then use the install DBO script PowerShell commandlet to do the deployment to my serverless SQL pool. Now, one thing I just want to quickly state here about using this commandlet. Usually, if you use this commandlet to do deployments with the DBOps PowerShell module to, for example, a SQL Server database, it will create a table inside that database so it can contain a log entry for all the different scripts it's run from your project. However, you can't do this with serverless SQL pools because of the infrastructure for it. So what you have to do is use the schema version table parameter and state the value for it is $no. So basically what you're saying is you don't want that table to be created. Now, because you're not creating a table to keep track of which scripts have run, you basically have to put some defensive logic inside the SQL you use in your scripts, for example, if not exist statements. So it's just something to bear in mind if you're going to use this method to do CI/CD for serverless SQL pools.
Can we also use this for dedicated SQL pools?
Sure, you can use it for dedicated SQL pools as well. In fact, you can actually remove the schema version table parameter I was just talking about if you're going to deploy it to dedicated SQL pools, because you can actually create the table there. One thing I do recommend though is that you actually create the schema version table beforehand so you can set it to use the replicate distribution type.
Can we see it in action?
Sure. Let's start with updating the project in Visual Studio Code. So here's the project that I showed you earlier in Visual Studio Code. For the benefit of this demo, I'm just going to quickly add a file which includes the SQL to create a new external table. From there, I'm just going to commit the change to my local Git repository, and that basically hardens the change of that new file. And then Visual Studio Code kindly invites me to synchronize the changes with the Git repository in Azure repos. And then once that's completed, I can go over to Azure repos, click on refresh, and as you can see, just now there is an update in the scripts folder. And if we go to Azure Pipelines, you can see the pipeline for it is actually running right now. And what this will actually do is create that new external table for me in the serverless SQL pool. And I can actually show you this in Azure Data Studio. So I have a connection already set up. And as you can see, I've already got one external table there. If I click on refresh now, you can see that the new external table has been created as well. And that's one way that you can perform the CI/CD for the database schema in your serverless SQL pool.
That's pretty cool, but can we do the same thing with GitHub?
Yes, you can. In fact, the logic you use to do it in GitHub is very similar to the logic you use in Azure DevOps. And I can actually quickly show you how it looks in GitHub now. So this GitHub repository effectively does the same as what I just showed you in Azure DevOps. So you can use this repository to perform CI/CD for this schema in your serverless SQL pools, with the main difference being that this repository actually uses GitHub Actions. So I click on the Actions tab. You can see I actually had a workflow completed earlier, and you can think of a workflow along the lines of a pipeline. Now, these workflows are actually defined by YAML files within GitHub, and they use a slightly different YAML schema than what you use for YAML pipelines in Azure pipelines. So I'm just going to scroll down now to highlight the fact that, yeah, the schema is different, but the logic for doing this is very similar. So again, it will run the workflow every time the main branch is updated. And if I scroll further down, you'll see again it installs the DBOps PowerShell module before running the install DBO script commandlet. So that's how you can do it in GitHub.
Well, that wraps up our video for today. Thank you very much, Kevin, for joining us. I'm sure I'm not the only one that was excited to hear about CI/CD. Tell us in the comments, are you also excited about CI/CD? I would love to hear about it. Again, my name is Ryan Magitimer. You can find me on Twitter. You can find Kevin on Twitter, Kev Chant. You can also find Synapse on Twitter, Azure_Synapse. And believe it or not, if you enjoy Twitter, if you enjoy social media, if that's the kind of thing you're into, I have just the program for you, the Azure Synapse Influencers Program. It is very fun. There's lots of people like me. There's also like my teammates. There's other exciting people. MVPs are part of it. Believe it or not, there's over 700 people, I believe, in it. 750, I believe, actually, is a little bit closer to the real number. It's very exciting. There's cool titles, champion, challenger, contender. 3, yes. All C's. And believe it or not, I did actually remember them this time. They're very catchy. At any rate, it's a very fun program. You can find more information about it in the description of this video. Very quick, fill out a couple things. Boom, you get a big logo. You can join us for Ask the Expert events. It's lots of fun. I highly recommend it. At any rate, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.